Thanks for joining us, everyone. My name is Erica Hoskins. I am an education specialist at Foundations, Inc. Welcome to our Beyond the Conference webinar series. Today we have Chaz Sumners from Foundations, Inc. with us, and we'll be getting started shortly. But before we do, though, I want to give you a little background information on Foundations, Inc. We are a national education nonprofit located in Mount Laurel, New Jersey, and our mission is to improve the quality of education by building the skills of educators. We work across the school day with after-school programs, schools, districts, and states to create a brighter future for every child every day. If you're interested in learning more about Foundations, you can follow us on social media, and I'll drop that information in the chat as well. You may already know us from our signature professional learning experience, the Beyond School Hours Conference, which is held each year. In 2026, we will be in Orlando, Florida from March 1st to March 4th. We'd love to have you all be our guests. Now, I'd like to introduce you to Chaz Sumners. Just so you know, this webinar will be archived on our website and YouTube, so you'll be able to access it later. Now I'll pass it over to Chaz.
Hello, everyone. I'm Chaz Sumners. I am an educational specialist here at Foundations, and I look forward to talking to you about some critical thinking during critical times. So, a little background about me. I spent 11 years teaching English and special education, and through that time, and before it, I started working at out of school time programs, and I worked my way from frontline staff to site coordinator to program director. So I'm familiar with a lot of the hoops that we have to jump through and the challenges that come with all different aspects of running the program. So let's get started today and talk about critical thinking during critical times. So today's session is on strengthening critical thinking skills. I'm so glad that you joined us today to explore how developing strong critical thinking skills can transform both teaching and learning. Today, we're not just looking at how to construct an argument, but how to empower our students to move beyond initial opinions into well-reasoned and, more importantly, evidence-based conclusions. We'll discuss strategies to encourage students to think deeply, reflect on their own reasoning, and support their ideas with solid evidence. These skills are essential not just in the classroom, but we know that they're essential in everyday decision making. So, in our session today, we'll share some practical methods and best practices to foster logical reasoning, promote thoughtful inquiry, and help students confidently articulate their viewpoints. You'll walk away with insights on how to create learning environments where critical dialogue thrives and personal insights are and values are balanced with objective analysis. So let's just jump in. So we talked about who we are at Foundations here before, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but we are here to we're dedicated to improving quality education for children every day. And we do that by working with leaders in organizations across a wide spectrum. So to kick off our session on enhancing critical thinking skills, we're going to start with an interactive activity using Slido. So this activity is designed to invite your personal insights and set the stage for our discussion here today. So here's what I'd like you to do. If you haven't already, navigate to Slido using the link provided on the screen or the QR code. And once you're on the Slido platform, you'll see a prompt asking for your definition of critical thinking. So just take a moment to think about what critical thinking means to you. I mean, it can be anything from your personal experience in the classroom, an article or book you've read, or how you define the process of questioning and analyzing information. There's no correct answers here, so don't worry about it. No pressure. Just put whatever you think. This is about gathering a range of perspectives to understand our diverse viewpoints. So go ahead and type in your definitions in the provided field and click submit. I'll give you guys a couple minutes to fill in your responses. Now, as you're submitting your thoughts, consider how your definition might incorporate elements like analysis, evaluation of evidence, or the ability to to challenge your assumptions and change your mind. Yes, analysis of facts, right? Huge part of critical thinking. Looking at a fact and trying to decide, is this fact accurate? Is it biased? Analyzing information from multiple sources, right? Because increasingly in this world, we see different stories coming from different sources. So we need to evaluate that information using what you know in the context of the situation to make a decision, right? Yeah, that critical thinking in the moment, thinking on your feet. Yeah, drawing conclusions, looking at all viewpoints. Thank you guys so much for participating. This is awesome. I also love this whole word cloud thing. Very cool. Um, Analyzing situations based on multiple perspectives, right? That's really important and a very powerful skill to teach our kids. Something that, quite frankly, we as adults sometimes need to be reminded to do. Generating deeper understanding, right? Like as we really sit and critically evaluate information, then we get to actually understand things at a deeper level using data. I love that, right? Data is looks like it's a very common answer here because we need that data to actually be able to make informed decisions. Being able to extrapolate, love that word. Being able to, as a former English teacher, I particularly love that word. I love being able to take what we have from data and then being able to draw conclusions from that, right? Awesome. Questioning and making judgments, right? Not being afraid to question what you believe in light of new information, because that's something that we see very often is very difficult to do, even as adults. So thank you guys so much for sharing all this information. I love all these perspectives, and they're going to help us establish a shared understanding of critical thinking that we can build on throughout today's session. So let's start by defining critical thinking. All right. We have two primary objectives that are going to guide our explanation. We're going to first think about what critical thinking means, right? Many people think about critical thinking just as like the ability to think clearly, right? But it encompasses so much more than that. It involves analyzing and evaluating information, challenging assumptions, and synthesizing ideas to form well-reasoned conclusions. By developing a precise definition, we ensure that we all have a common understanding of the skills that underlie effective and reasoning and decision making. Having a common definition allows us to know that we're all on the same page as we're moving forward. And second, we're going to examine how to use a critical thinking framework, right? We're going to present a structured framework that provides you with a roadmap for processing the information and then building arguments. The framework will help you break down complex ideas into manageable parts, ensuring that each step from making a claim to supporting it with evidence is clear and purposeful. We're going to look at how such a framework can be applied in practice in your classroom, to enhance discussions and improve student outcomes. So these two objectives serve as the foundation for our session today. And by the end of our session together, you're going to be better equipped to articulate what critical thinking entails, and then use this framework to foster deeper and more analytical discussions in your classrooms. So let's go ahead and get started on this journey to unlock the full potential of critical thinking. So we all know that there are many different definitions of critical thinking, right? When any term, if you give it to somebody and you say, hey, you give it to 10 people, say, hey, define this term for me, you're going to get a multitude of different definitions. So we want to make sure that we're working from the same definition. The definition we're focusing on today is critical thinking is the process of reasoning and then critically evaluating information and our own thought processes to come to conclusions and make decisions. So this definition emphasizes not just the importance of assessing external information, but also that critical self-reflection of our own ideas and biases, right? Thinking about the way that we're thinking. The metacognitive piece of it is very important, and it's a skill that, once again, we don't just need to focus on teaching our students, our youth, but it's something that we need to think about in our everyday lives. So critical thinking is not a new focus in education, right? We've been thinking about critical thinking forever, right? Thinking about how we think is one of the oldest, forms of thought, right? That's why philosophy is such a storied and old discipline. But in fact, this philosophy that we're talking about, it extends back over 2,000 years, right? All the way back to like ancient Greece and before that, quite frankly. But commonly, the roots are traced to ancient Greece. For example, consider the contributions of Socrates, right? One of the founding figures of Western philosophy. Socrates pioneered what is now known as the Socratic method, which you might have heard of. It's a form of systemic questioning that encourages deep exploration by continuing to ask questions. It's sort of like a five whys framework, right? You ask why, and then you ask why for the answer, and you continue to dig down to get to the real root of the philosophical idea that you're discussing. By continually asking these probing questions, Socrates helped his students recognize inconsistencies in their own reasoning, right? And he also made sure that he was challenging them to think beyond surface level responses, just giving a random response like, oh, I don't know. Oh, just because that's the way it is. We need better, deeper responses than that. We need deeper thinking. Now, what made the Socratic method so revolutionary was its inherent unpredictability. You never know the outcome of critical thinking. That's why you're asking the questions, because you don't know the outcome. So Socratic questioning often led to unexpected insights and perspectives, right? Revealing that questioning assumptions could be just as important as the answers themselves, right? Sometimes it's the journey that we took to find the information. That journey can be edifying, and can build our character and our knowledge base just as much as coming to the eventual conclusion. The process itself, the Socratic method, critical thinking in general, demonstrates that looking at ideas through a critical lens and evaluating the way that you're thinking about them is dynamic and transformative. Like it might challenge some long-held beliefs that you have. And in doing so, it can open up new avenues for intellectual growth. A little fun historical side note about Socrates. He was famously convicted of corrupting the youth of Athens because he was teaching them to ask these questions, right? So his students are going home and they're asking these questions with their parents. I'm like, who is telling you to keep asking me why? This guy, you know what? Let's sentence him to death. His method of questioning exposed logical fallacies, and it made people challenge societal norms. And that made the Senate so angry that they decided that they were going to kill him. And then, of course, they decided that instead of killing him, they would just have him pay a fine. But Socrates got to decide what the fine was. He questioned the nature of the fine and the process, and then suggested a sum so low for the fine that he should pay that more senators voted to execute him afterwards than voted to execute him in the first place. Just saying, so again, we never know what the outcomes of our critical thinking can be. So, what is critical thinking? First, the foundational components of critical thinking are organized into three main elements, right? We have the subject, the processes, and the outcomes. This structure provides a comprehensive view of how individuals can critically analyze information and then use that information to reach informed judgments. Critical thinking begins with identifying the core subjects that require analysis. So this includes things like external information, such as arguments, data sets, any claims presented in discussions or text or media. For example, uh, you might be evaluating supporting details of a research article or doing something like dissecting the rationale behind a political argument. Equally important is the focus of our internal thought processes, right? Again, this is what we know as metacognition. This involves thinking about how we think, also assessing our inherent biases, any assumptions we might be making about the topic, and the frameworks that we're already using to understand those complex issues. Recognizing both of these subjects ensures that our analysis is not one-sided, and that it incorporates a balanced review of external content and internal reflection. So next, we delve into the process of critical thinking, right? Effective critical thinking relies on a well-defined process. The first process is reasoning or systematic thinking, right? This is where ideas are connected logically in our head, right? Neurons connect to other neurons, forming chains of thought that build up an argument. So, for instance, when you're facing a problem in a classroom setting, reasoning allows us to tie evidence to claims in a structured way that's easy for students to follow. The second process is evaluation, right? So this is when we're talking about judging the reliability, the accuracy, the relevancy of information based on specific criteria. Evaluation might include things like questioning the validity of sources, determining if an argument is free of logical fallacies, or something like checking if evidence is directly relevant to the claim, right? Because you might have a logical fallacy called a non sequitur, where somebody just gives you some information that has nothing to do with what you're talking about in as a way to like waylay your thought process. So together, these thought processes ensure that critical thinking is both structured and more importantly, reflective, right? Preventing us from accepting information at face value and guiding us to a more robust analysis. And now finally, we want to consider the outcomes of critical thinking, right? The ultimate goal of engaging with both the subjects and the process is to arrive at a clear and justified conclusion, right? We want to have a definitive answer. The outcome represents a well-supported judgment that emerges with thorough reasoning and careful evaluation. Now, in practical terms, this might be the decision to adopt a particular teaching strategy, or formulating a persuasive argument during a debate. Or, I don't know, maybe something like arriving at an answer for some sort of inquiry-based project, right? Where the beginning of the project is a question and at the end we get to an answer. Now, the clarity of this conclusion reflects the success of the critical thinking process, right? The results, the product is a result of the process. It's not merely about getting the facts, but transforming those facts into an informed and decisive standpoint. So just consider these three elements as interconnected pillars for critical thought. And emphasizing these components in educational practices can really help foster deeper analytical skills. And then with your students, it can empower them to engage with information in a thoughtful and systematic manner, which is good because they are constantly being bombarded with information, just like the rest of us. So now, let's talk about what it looks like in an OST setting, right? With our definition of critical thinking in mind, and that is, as a reminder, the process of reasoning and critically evaluating information and our own thought processes to come to conclusions and make decisions. Let's think about your own program. Have you seen critical thinking happening in your program? Share it in the chat box. Let us know. Let us know when you've seen a student engage in critical thinking, and then what does that look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? I know, kind of a tough one to noodle over, right? So while you're thinking and you're answering your answers in the chat box, I know something that popped into my mind that you hear very often in program. You'll have a kid come up to you and you'll say, they'll say, so and so hates me. And you say, well, okay, well, why do you say that? Well, they're always yelling at me. And you say, well, why are they yelling at you? You know, questioning, right? Getting that data. They don't understand what I'm trying to do. So do they hate you or do they not understand you? You know, that kind of thing. Oh, okay, awesome. Look at this. All right, so seeing a student engage in critical thinking on their own makes me feel like I'm succeeding, right? Yeah, you get that. I like to call it that teacher buzz, where you see you give a kid a tool, right, and you watch them use that tool on their own independently, and you're just like, oh my God, that's incredible. You are succeeding. You're winning, kid, and I helped you do that. That's awesome. It's great, especially when it comes to critical thinking. Yeah, it sounds like teachers asking why and how do you know, right? Instead of just asking for the answer and then being pleased that they gave you the right answer, asking why, right? And then asking them how they came to that conclusion, making them already start to examine their own metacognitive process. Yeah, Vanessa, you're right. It can be frustrating with some students. It takes time, but it's so worth it when you see them actually using that in real time. It's so impactful for the kid and for you, quite frankly. Um, Asking why, challenging assumptions, right? Like asking a kid, well, why do you think this thing? Students communicating and using problem solving steps. Yep. Watching them work things out as a team, and then come to a conclusion. Incredible. Thank you guys so much for sharing. I love all this participation. So, to develop deeper critical thinking, it's essential to distinguish between opinions and data formed arguments, right? And we're not naming names, but I know that we can all think of adults in our lives that sometimes need this kind of refresher, right? So this slide provides a side-by-side comparison that highlights some of those key differences, right? So let's start with opinions. Now, when we're talking about opinions, we're talking about things that are subjective, right? They come from your personal beliefs, your experiences, your intuition. Um, for example, a teacher might say, I feel that project-based learning is the best way to engage students. Now, such statements might reflect personal conviction and experience, but they're not always supported by something that is measurable evidence, right? Opinions can differ widely from person to person, and they're susceptible to influences such as in cultural backgrounds, your personal bias, of course, you know, just the things that you grew up believing and were instilled in you, or even just your emotional state at the time, right? There have been plenty of times where I'm in an elevated state and I view what is happening differently than what is actually objectively happening just because I'm, you know, angry or what have you. So without external verification, opinions might vary dramatically, right? They make them less consistent and they're sometimes less reliable when you're forming policies or educational strategies. Now, um, by contrast, data-informed arguments are built on a more robust foundation, let's say. Data-informed arguments rely on verifiable evidence drawn from credible sources, right? Things like empirical research, statistics, peer-reviewed studies. Consider a classroom context, right, where a teacher might say something like, research indicates that project-based learning improves critical thinking skills by 20%, accompanied by data from a reputable study that shows, you know, where they got that number from. This type of argument is not solely based on personal experience, right? It's not just my opinion. It's been it's strengthened by evidence that's been systematically evaluated, right? And it's been scrutinized, right? It's been peer reviewed. When we're talking about forming data-informed arguments, each piece of evidence is subjected to critical analysis, ensuring that conclusions are not just logical, but they're also reproducible, right? If you give the same data to other people, they will come to a similar conclusion. as opposed to opinions, which can vary wildly, right, when you ask somebody about something. So, when actions and policies are both based solely on opinion, they risk being inconsistent. They might not hold up under scrutiny, right? But using data informed arguments typically leads to conclusions that are more defendable, right? Just they enable you as the educator and a decision maker to formulate strategies that are backed by research. You're not just like throwing darts at a dartboard. Um, and in educational settings, as we all know, it's especially important, right? Where the goal is based on, developing a curriculum that where you want your students to progress using certain instructional methods that have been like carefully analyzed to actually provide positive outcomes for your students. So when we're distinguishing between opinions and data informed arguments, um, it's important to note that personal perspectives still have value, right? We don't want to just discount opinions. They give you valuable context and that human experience factor, right? And they give you insight that data alone might not capture. So the key is to ensure that when you're using personal opinions, they're either supported by reliable evidence or they're clearly identified. Just saying, hey, look, this is just my opinion, but here's what I think. Here's what I feel. So by doing so, educators, students alike can engage in more effective dialogue and decision making. So, in summary, the table's basically highlighting that opinions are subjective, personal, variable, and data-informed arguments are characterized by their reliance on credible, objective, and systematically evaluated evidence. So, this distinction it's critical not just in academic research, but it's critical in every decision we make every single day, right? So let's talk about a framework, right? So there are a lot of different approaches to developing critical thinking, but we're going to focus on an approach that's based on backing up your ideas with evidence. So it's vital to define the difference between an opinion and data-informed reasoning, which we've just done, right? And critical thinking is not just students stating their own opinions. Instead, it's them evaluating evidence and making it informed reasoning based on that. So today, we're going to focus on this framework. So claim plus evidence equals reasoning. This framework's vital because it helps students structure their thoughts and support discussions with clear, well-supported points. So by the end of this segment, you'll understand how to break down reasoning into its core components, right? Paving the way for improved academic achievement, higher level reasoning skills in your classroom, and just giving students a tool that they're going to use every single day. When you integrate these three elements, forming a compelling claim, supporting it with robust evidence, and then connecting the dots through really rigorous reasoning, we draw a clear path towards our informed decision making, right? It's easy for the person that we're talking to see how we've arrived at that conclusion. And then that makes it easy for us to discuss it if we still have, a difference of opinion on it. So this framework not only strengthens the context of our discussions, but it also helps nurture those everyday critical thinking skills, right? Students learn to evaluate information in a methodical manner, to challenge your own assumptions, and to develop reasoned conclusions, right? All of which are essential skills, no matter where you are. The framework ultimately encourages a deeper level of analysis, right? When students and educators practice this method, they're empowered to move beyond opinions and sort of superficial assessments to creating a learning environment where each conclusion is thoughtfully, derived and, I guess, more importantly, effectively communicated, right? Because even if you have a very good, reason, effectively communicating that is difficult if you can't define the process that you've used to get to that conclusion. So the process begins with claims, right? A claim is a clear, for the purpose of this, it's a clear and debatable statement that expresses your own position. It's essential that the claim's well defined, right? And that it sets the context for the entire discussion. So when you're actually vocalizing what your opinion is, what the claim is, be sure that you're very specific, or at least as specific as you can be. Um, a really robust claim should be open to examination and challenge, right? It should allow room for sort of deeper inquiry rather than just serving as a mere assertion. Um, for instance, in discussing education, a claim might be incorporating digital tools in the classroom enhances student engagement. Very clear statement, right? It's debatable. Like we can have a discussion about it. There can be different viewpoints on it, and it invites further explanation. It's like, okay, well, now let's dig in and let's see how true that is. Another example might be global warming is a serious threat to our planet. So then now that we understand the claim, right? Next, we have to introduce evidence. Um, this is the process of collecting credible, relevant facts, data, examples to support your claim. Evidence can include statistics from reputable sources, results from empirical research, or just real world examples that demonstrate the claim in action, right? Um, it's important to note that the quality of evidence is crucial. It has to be both verifiable and directly linked to the claim. Uh, and that ensures that the argument's built on a solid foundation. So in our example that we just used, the evidence might include research findings from the US Department of Education or empirical data from studies that evaluate technology integration in the classroom. Another good example might be scientific studies. So for our global warming, right? Scientific studies show that average global temperatures have risen significantly over the past 100 years, right? And we know that sea levels are rising. So now, the final element, reasoning. Reasoning is the cognitive process that connects your claim with your evidence. It involves carefully articulating how and, more importantly, why your evidence substantiates your claim. It's not enough to simply list facts, right? You must explain those logical links that tie them together. Now, this process often includes things like identifying patterns, highlighting cause and effect relationships, um, and addressing potential counterpoints or alternative explanations, right? Because when you present your reasoning, you're then going to have to defend that reasoning from, counterpoints from other people. And they might also present alternate explanations about why, you know, the evidence that you have, like your claim and your evidence, could lead to a different reasoning. Again, that's why it's important to be able to draw a clear through line from your claim, the evidence that you've collected, and how that leads to your reasoning. Um, when you use sound reasoning, the argument transforms into a well-supported, coherent thought process. Uh, so in our example about technology, a teacher might reason that because digital tools offer interactive and personalized learning experiences, they just naturally lead to a higher student engagement and improved academic outcomes. In our example about global warming, we might come to the conclusion that these rising temperatures and rising sea levels are directly linked to human activities like burning fossil fuels that release these gases into the atmosphere that then make the earth hotter. These gases trap heat, causing our planet to warm. These these reasonings, like the reasoning, the conclusion for these shows a clear through line through what our initial claim was, the evidence that we're using to back that up, and what conclusion we've come to, so that we can then engage in a fruitful discussion about that reasoning, as opposed to what can often degenerate into an argument when we're just voicing opinions. So let's bring the framework together. Let's look at a practical example, right? So first, we'll look at the example that we walked through a little. Integrating technology in the classroom improves student engagement. Now, to support this claim, we looked at evidence from studies published by the US Department of Education and data provided by different statutes that determine what supporting a claim, what critical thinking actually looks like, and what technical integration looks like in the classroom. By linking the evidence directly to the claim, we build a persuasive reasoning and argument that illustrates how technology can benefit modern classrooms. Now, this is a great demonstration of how we take a claim, we rigorously support it with evidence, and it leads us to reasoning that leads to, hopefully, more compelling educational strategies. Let's take a look at another example. So in this example, I'd love a little assistance in the chat. We're going to look at a claim and then just some suggestions about evidence that we might use to back up this claim. I would love for you guys to share in the chat. So our claim here is students should get more recess time, something you hear all the time from our kiddos, right? And honestly, it's not even elementary, just elementary school kids. I am a firm believer in the fact that like older kids, older students need more free play time too, right? So what evidence would we be looking at to support our claim and then turn it into something like productive and impactful reasoning that we could use to then roll out this argument? Well, I know for one, I've observed that when you have students and you give them recess time, they tend to be better behaved, right? They're able to get some of that anxious energy out, and then it allows them to, be more engaged students afterwards. Yeah, giving them more outdoor time can, be creative, and it can also be a learning activity, right? We can fold in learning objectives to that. Extra recess gives students a chance to release that extra energy, like I was saying, right? I love the idea of the walking classroom, right? Doing some moving around while we're learning gives them something to look forward to too, right? Gives them like it lets them know, okay, well, if I just hold on until lunch, then I know that I'm going to get out there and I'm going to be able to play some soccer, right? It leads to better academic performance because students learn better when they're better behaved and they're more engaged. A positive impact on mental acuity, right? Like people are more focused after they've been able to get some of that energy out. Reducing disruptive behaviors, right? You're better behaved because they're not looking for a way, some other venue in which to get rid of that excess energy that might not exactly be productive or helpful in the moment. Gives an opportunity to release some stress from a long day in the classroom. Yeah, absolutely. Love it. So you've hit on most of the on all of the ones that I already put on here for evidence, which shows that you guys are all stars. So that's awesome. One of the benefits of a non-traditional classroom, yeah, still learning. Learning can be done anywhere, right? We know that learning can be done even outside in recess. You're absolutely right, Vanessa. It's a misconception that when students are just outside playing, that they're not learning. That's just not true. And it's something that I think we've all, an opinion we've all run into when in the OST space. So now, what would our reasoning sound like for this critical framework, right? We have our claim of students should get more recess time. Our evidence is that it helps students, learn more effectively. It leads to better behavior and better physical and mental health. So what could our reasoning sound like? Oh yes, also health factors, Maria. That's completely true. Yeah, I think that's something that's undersold. So our reasoning could sound something like recess helps students learn better because they have better personal health and behaviors in the classroom. When recess time is limited, it allows teachers to spend more time teaching, but can result in less learning. That doesn't mean no learning. It just means less than what might be taking place in a traditional instructional classroom. But also those other benefits can help, counterbalance that. So let's take a moment to do one more example. Let's think about an example for secondary students, some of our older kids. Now, let's start with a claim, just like we did with our elementary schoolers, that we hear commonly from students of this age group. Students should be able to have their cell phone during the school day. Yeah, I'm sure none of you have ever heard that argument from any of your students. So now, we're going to think about some evidence that we could use to support the fact that students should be able to have their cell phone during the school day. While you guys think about it, I will just say as an aside, these were two of my favorite topics when it came to teaching argumentative writing and persuasive writing as an English teacher, because you want to pick something that students feel very passionate about. And these are definitely two topics about which students feel very passionate. So what do we think could be useful evidence supporting emergencies and interactive learning? Yep, I love it. I love it. There are, technologies in the classroom that can be implemented that require the use of a personal device, be it a cell phone, a laptop, what have you. And then, of course, we never know what's going on in somebody's personal life. So we never know if there are emergencies that could happen, something that could cause them to need a cell phone. It is true that not every student has access to a cell phone. That is true. And that can sometimes create issues. Like when we're talking about opinions, that's one of those really it's one of those really good times to examine how your differing life experience can vastly change how what your opinion is of a topic, even though you might be in the same age group, right? You might have two kids that are the same age in your program, and one thinks that, oh, it's not important to have cell phones during school because I don't have one. Like I don't need one in out of school time because I don't need one ever. I don't have one. Meanwhile, their friend who already has a cell phone is like, no, I need this all the time, please. Um, so student reassurances that they're connected to family members, right? Like letting them know that there's always a way for them to touch base and connect with a family member. That can help reduce that stress and anxiety of the school day. And then yeah, it also enhances communication. It's also important to note that you can also do things like digital task management, stuff like increasingly things like Google Classroom. They allow you to check that all the information that you have for your school day from a device. So here's some of the evidence that we came up with here, right? Cell phones are a communication mechanism. We know that increasingly they're just a necessary part of life. We just need them in order to be able to function in society. Communication is important in emergency situations, right? We all have emergencies that come up, and being able to, be reached at any time is, incredibly important, just like Danielle said in the chat here. Also, cell phones can be used in ways that promote learning, right? We talked about different educational platforms that, employ the use of things like cell phones, digital platforms when it comes to just task management, things like that. So, how do we develop a reasoning, right? An effective argument for supporting the fact that students should have their cell phones during the school day based on the evidence that we have here. What might that sound like? Well, it might sound something like students should be able to have their cell phones in school during the school day so that they can communicate with teachers and family, particularly in emergency situations. Some believe that cell phones are a distraction to learning, but allowing cell phones in the classroom allows teachers to explore healthy and safe uses for cell phones, right? And it also lets you, model, or not model, but show them how to effectively manage their technology use while they're in a, contained setting before they get out into the real world and they're just constantly buried in their phone. They know to use it when it's necessary and then to put it away when it's not. So, when engaging in critical thinking, it's beneficial for students to internalize this systemic approach, right, that we're talking about by asking targeted questions. These questions, they don't just function as a guide, but they also ensure that they examine every facet of the information before drawing their conclusions. So consider this framing process that we've formed around these three questions here. What is the quality of the evidence that you're using? You want to encourage students to pause and evaluate the reliability, the validity, and the source of the information at hand. They should ask, is the evidence coming from a reputable and unbiased source? Um, Things like, is the data current and relevant to the discussion that we're having? Also, what are research methods or criteria that underpin this evidence, right? You might be looking at a study and seeing what the results of a study are, but look at what actually went in the process for that study. Students might consider examples like comparing data from a peer-reviewed journal versus anecdotal accounts, or evaluating whether statistics come from a government agency, an academic study, or opinion-based blog posts, right? By scrutinizing the quality of the evidence, students become more adept at distinguishing between well-substantiated facts and mere unsupported claims, right? Next, we want to ask, does the evidence support the claim? Now, this question is the one that's going to prompt your students to bridge that gap between just the evidence, between the evidence and the claim, right? They should analyze whether the facts provide actually, whether they align with the assertion that's made, and if they align with it, do they back it up, right? Because I mean, you'll often find facts that they challenge the claim that you initially made, and you need to be ready to pivot and change your initial claim. So this discussion can often sound like, how directly does the evidence relate to the claim that we're making, right? Are there any logical connections, or does the evidence only partially address the claim, like tangentially address it? And can the evidence be interpreted a different way, right? Which is incredibly important, right? Because most evidence, depending on the perspective of which you're looking at it, it can be interpreted different ways. So we need to take that into account when we are building our argument. For example, um, if a claim suggests that a particular teaching method significantly increases student engagement, students should look for specific data points or studies that explicitly measure student engagement before accepting the claim. So now, the third question, what evidence or perspective might be missing, right? Critical thinking involves recognizing the limits of available information just as much as it involves analyzing what's present, right? We need to think about what might not be said in the evidence that we're using, what is being left out, and why is it being left out? So questions in this vein sound something like, is there any additional data, research, or viewpoints that haven't been considered? Could there be conflicting evidence that challenges the claim? Or how might different perspectives, especially those that are often overlooked, like those of the marginalized, alter our understanding of this issue? So this line of inquiry is particularly valuable because it promotes students to seek a comprehensive view, sort of a holistic view of the topic, considering not just the supportive evidence, but also dissenting opinions, and the gaps that might be present in the current data set that they have. And it might well lead to questions like whether socioeconomic, cultural, or contextual factors might have been adequately explored when this data was created. So when we integrate these three questions into their analysis, students develop a layered approach to critical thinking. They learn to interrogate the integrity of evidence, right? To discern that logical connection between claim and supporting facts. This method doesn't just equip students to construct well-supported arguments. It also fosters a lifelong intellectual curiosity and a deeper commitment to lifelong learning, which is why I find it so powerful. So, how do we know that our evidence is quality, or how do we get kids to understand what valuable evidence is, right? We want to assess the source of the information. You want to begin by asking who created it. Focus on questions like, is it produced by a reputable organization or institution? For example, content from respected entities like a major academic institution, government agency, or established media outlets is generally more trustworthy. You want to ask, is the author a credentialed expert in the field? Things like that, right? You want to look for those credentials and see how qualified they are to be giving you this information. You want to also examine the evidence that's provided, right? Because reliable information doesn't just appear out of thin air. It's substantiated by credible evidence. When you're evaluating the source, you want to ask, what evidence supports the claims that are made? Are primary sources used when possible? Does the source include detailed explanations of its methodologies or its research processes? Things like that. We also want to analyze the language and the tone, right? The way information is presented can really provide clues about its purpose and, more importantly, about its bias. So consider things like, is the language neutral and factual, or is it laden with this sort of emotionally charged words, and does it have a lot of exaggeration in it? Does the source present a balanced view, or does it rely on one-sided arguments, right? Does it give you both sides of the argument? And the most important guiding question there is, what's the goal of the piece, right? Then the person produced this, what was their intention? We also want to consider timeliness and relevance, because even the most reputable sources, they have to be current and applicable to your topic or your audience, right? So is it up to date? Does the content align with the scope and the depth of your topic? Are there any gaps in the coverage, or are there outdated references that could compromise the overall argument, right? So by following these steps, evaluating the origin of the source, analyzing the provided evidence, scrutinizing the language and tone, and verifying its timeliness and relevance, you can more confidently determine whether a piece of information is suitable for your work. So teaching critical thinking can be complicated and challenging, right? In the limited time available that you have with your kids, teachers, OST staff, instructors don't always have the time to facilitate critical thinking. One of the joys of working in the OST space is that you have a little more flexibility to do that, right? You can take some more time to develop a critical thinking in your students, as opposed to during their school day, where there might not be very much time because of, just the restrictive nature of the curriculum. So to effectively practice critical thinking, your students need time. It takes time for your students to consider issues that don't have an easy answer, right? It takes time for us to do it. So we can't assume that they're just going to be able to give us an answer at the drop of a hat, right? So sometimes it's just better to ask them the question and then circle back to it later. Just let them, really noodle on it for a little. Permission, right? You want to make sure that students know that there can be multiple answers and there's no correct answer, right? You want to give them the permission to explore and draw their own conclusions, right? We're all working through this together to find the answer. We don't have a right answer yet. We're looking for that answer. So all of, your conclusions are, can be considered. Diversity, right? Kids are going to have a diversity of opinions. So you want to welcome and encourage those discussions, right? That doesn't mean accepting all comments with equal value. It's really important to emphasize that reality isn't up for debate. This is one of the greatest challenges of our current time, in my opinion. And a lot of people will believe conspiracy theories. They'll engage in selective memory, or they'll deny inconvenient facts that don't align with their belief systems, right? We call this cognitive bias. Students can only engage in critical thinking when dealing with a basis of truth. So when we're talking about a basis of truth, we're talking about examples like something that's frequently up for debate is that Joe Biden won the 2020 election, or that climate change is happening, right? We shouldn't accept opposite explanations in the interest of valuing every contribution. And even if it's hard, we shouldn't shy away from those subjects with our kids. Engagement. Students have to do the active thinking. And so the topics you address should be provocative and engaging, period, end of sentence, right? It has to be something that actually interests them. Otherwise, why would they care to think about it? Risk taking, right? Thinking freely is risky inherently. So ideas can challenge prior opinions. They can be contradictory, and they don't always come out smoothly. So encourage and positively reinforce students to take those cognitive risks. We also have respect, right? Respect your students as thinkers. Just because they're young doesn't mean that they can't have great ideas, that they can't ask important questions and change the way you think. It used to happen to me all the time in programming in the classroom. And then value, of course. The way we talk to students needs to show that we value their thoughts and opinions. We value them just as much as we value any of our peers. So, a couple resources for you. Project Zero is an absolutely essential resource for every person that works with children. They have hundreds of resources on basically every educational topic under the sun. I also want to highlight the Thinking Routines Toolbox, right? So they have routines, educator guides, and student handouts for thinking about all types of complex issues. I will drop that in that link for you guys in the chat here as soon as I copy it. Or I'll just type it. So this resource is awesome. And then the larger site in general, has a lot of really useful evidence-based strategies and tools that help support educators across the spectrum of at a school time, working with kids in any way, space, or shape. So I would like to take a moment to point you to the feedback survey that's in the chat. Please fill that out, because that's how we inform what we do and the content that we provide you. I also want to highlight that registration for our 2026 Beyond School Hours in Orlando in March that Erica mentioned earlier is live. So please go ahead and sign up, because we look forward to seeing you in sunny Florida. Also, please join us April 23rd for the next portion of our Beyond the Conference series, which is talking about curiosity, connection, and the power of human skills in an AI world. Once again, I've been Chaz Saunders, and thank you all so much for joining me and going on this journey of critical thinking with me.
I'd like to take a moment to thank you, Chaz, for this presentation today and for all of you that attended. Again, please take a moment to complete the brief survey about our session. The link is in the chat. We definitely value your feedback. A certificate of attendance will be sent within a week to all those who attended live and completed the survey. We hope you'll join us for our next session on April 23rd. The future is human curiosity, connection, and the power of human skills in the AI world. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.
Oh, absolutely, Danielle. You can just go ahead and if you sign up for the BSH, the conference, there are so many different incredible training opportunities there.